As a developer, I have made tons of mistakes. Some are as simple as forgetting a semicolon, and others are more complex and have cost me tens of thousands of dollars. And in this video, I want to share with you two mistakes I made specifically revolving around interviewing. The first mistake is going to be something that's just frankly quite embarrassing, and the second one is one that cost me about $40,000. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name is Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you. But in this video, we're going to take a step back and actually focus on some mistakes that I made so you don't make those same mistakes. And the first one we're going to start with is the one you definitely want to hear about, which is how I cost myself $40,000 with one single interview. So to do this, we have to go back quite a ways, back to when I was applying for college. So I was applying for college, and there's a particular program at the college I was applying to called the RAKES program. And this is a program specifically for computer science majors that are interested in like an entrepreneurial business side of things. And that's because this program does computer science as your major, and it does a business minor, but it's focused more on like small business, entrepreneurial, and creating your own stuff. It's like the startup sector of the school that I went to, and it has its own curriculum, its own housing. It's kind of separate from the rest of the college, and you have a lot of your own classes. But to get into this is very difficult. They only accept a few students each year. You have to have good grades. You have to have a good interview. You have to have a bunch of other stuff. Now, I had a lot of the requirements that I needed, but I really struggled with the interview. Now, to figure out why exactly I struggled with the interview, we need to step back even a little bit further, all the way back to between my junior and senior year of high school. This is when I applied to the school, and I applied to the school as a mechanical engineer. And that's because I had never once done programming in my entire life. I'd never touched a computer to do programming. I didn't even know what programming was back then, and I thought I want to be a mechanical engineer. So I wrote down mechanical engineering, applied for the school, and that was that. Then my senior year of high school, I took a robotics class, an underwater robotics class, and in there we did a small amount of programming. We probably spent 1, maybe 2 weeks programming in this language called BASIC, and it wasn't Visual Basic, it was just BASIC. It was like some chipset language, super basic, why they called it BASIC most likely, and I learned like ifs and loops, and that's pretty much it. But I was like, wow, this is really cool, I really enjoyed this, and I immediately changed my major from mechanical engineering to computer engineering, because I thought I still wanted to be in the engineering college. So now with that background out of the way, let's fast forward a little bit to where the RAKES program, they get back to me and they say, hey, we like your application. We want you to come in and do an interview. And it's everyone comes in on the same day and they interview through every single person and they get back to you a couple weeks later. So I go in and I see a bunch of people, a couple of people I know, mostly people I don't know. I'm kind of talking with them. There's a lot of nervous energy in the room. Everybody's dressed up fancy for this interview. They don't really know what to expect. And it's like, am I going to make it? Am I going to not? This is a pretty big deal. A lot is riding on this interview. So I finally get to do my interview and I go into the interview. And the first question they ask me is, hey, it says that you're a mechanical engineer here. Why are you in this program? This is for, computer science and computer engineering kind of majors, but you're a mechanical engineer. Like, that's not going to work. And of course, I was like, well, I changed my major, to computer science. I just must not have gone through. Like, I should be a computer engineering major, not a mechanical engineering major. And I was trying to stumble along and explain this process to them. And that was part of the mistake I made, is I was really trying to justify myself and explain myself about like, oh, there must be a mistake. You guys messed up. I did this correct. Clearly, your system is wrong. And when you're in an interview and you're telling the people, hey, I did everything right, but you're doing everything wrong, that just looks bad. Even if it's true, even if it's 100% true, which it probably was, it still looked bad. It made me look bad because I was constantly blaming other people for this instead of saying, oh, my bad or whatever. I originally was this and I switched it to this, so on and so on. I was like blaming them for this issue, which was a terrible way to start the interview. That's pretty much the first thing I did was say, you guys suck. Now let me talk about myself. So definitely don't do that if you ever do an interview. Now, luckily, they didn't just immediately kick me out when I started saying that, and they instead decided to interview me further. They asked some generic questions like, when have you had to deal with struggle? When have you had strengths? And so on. All that, BS generic interview questions. And then they got to some of the more technical questions. They were like, oh, what programming languages do you have experience with? And I told them, oh, I have experience in BASIC. And they were like, BASIC what? Is it like Visual Basic, like VB.NET? Like, what do you experience? And I'm like, oh, it's called BASIC. And they're like, is it VB.NET? I was like, I don't know. It's called BASIC. I'd only used it for like 2 weeks. So I was like, I don't know. I think it's called BASIC. And I sounded super unconfident. And that was kind of the second big mistake I made in this interview is I just didn't exude any confidence. I was second guessing myself all the time. I was like, well, maybe it's VB.NET. I don't know. All I know is it's called BASIC. It's for this like robot that I made in this robotics class. And they kind of looked at me like, okay, this kid does not know anything. He's a complete idiot. He's kind of just talking about all these random things and he has no idea what he's talking about. And it really made me look worse than if I said I've never programmed in my entire life, because it looked like I just had no idea what was going on even after some experience. Another mistake I made in the moment was I constantly kept bringing up my shortcomings. I was like, I've only worked in this language for a few weeks, or I only did this small thing in this, or I only did this, or I only did that. And I really focused on all the things I didn't do or all the things I did poorly. And I kept saying, oh, well, here's why I don't know this question, because I'm bad at this, or I didn't spend very much time in this. And that's kind of a bad idea. You don't really want to exude all of your weaknesses in an interview. You want to try to portray as many of your strengths as possible, and even spin some of your weaknesses to like show off your strengths as well. If you do have some weaknesses that they start probing you on, try to really focus on the strengths you have instead of constantly focusing on the weaknesses like I did. And I kind of immediately knew after that this interview was not going to go well, because they stopped the technical questions pretty much immediately right there. They asked me that one question about what programming languages I knew, and then after that, like, okay, we're done with the interview. We'll get back to you later. And from that, I pretty much knew, okay, I'm never going to hear back from them again. This was terrible. And this is what ended up costing me about $40,000. And that's because this program, it completely covers all your schooling, not only just your tuition, but also covers all of your room and board. So I would have paid for all of my room and board for the entirety of college, which, is about $30,000-$40,000. So if I would have just done better on that interview, come in more prepared, knew what programming languages I used, really focused on my strengths instead of explaining my weaknesses, I may have been able to get in. But instead, I really messed up this interview and it cost me, like I said, about $30,000 to $40,000. Now, luckily, this second mistake didn't cause me nearly as much harm as the first. It definitely embarrassed me, but it didn't actually cause me to lose the job I was applying for, even though it very well could have. And this mistake was just not understanding how exactly things work in the web development professional technical world. And we have to kind of fast forward a little bit all the way to about my junior year of college, and this is when I was learning about Git. I had a particular class called software engineering, I think, and we were learning Git and we were actually learning TypeScript. It was about the most modern class you could possibly get in college. We went from learning, C and Java and assembly to TypeScript and Git. So this was like big time modern day stuff back then. And I really didn't understand Git at all. I liked TypeScript. It was cool. I was using JavaScript before, so it really wasn't that hard for me. But Git, I was like, I have no idea what's going on. What's Git? What's GitHub? I thought they were the same thing back then. I was super confused. So I was like, I'm just not going to use Git. It's too confusing for me. I'm just going to use Dropbox. So I would upload my code to Dropbox, and then I would send it off to my teacher. I would send it off to people in my group, and they would download it from Dropbox, and then re-upload to Dropbox, and I would download it. And that was my entirety of version control, was just Dropbox this, Dropbox that, and so on. Every project I worked on in school, I would upload it to Dropbox, download it from Dropbox, and then when it came time for me to apply for jobs about a year later in my senior year of college, I posted all of these Dropbox links on my resume. So every single resume I had, instead of having like a GitHub profile or a GitHub repository for my code, or even an online version of the working website, I was like, here is the Dropbox link for this project, and you can download it and run it yourself. This is the worst thing you can do. Not only did I not use version control, which is a huge red flag for any company that's hiring, but I also didn't have a working version of the site. I expected, the HR people to download and render out the site, which is never going to happen. You definitely need to have a working version for people to look at, because they're never going to run it on their own. And by far, worst of all, most of the projects I had listed on my resume weren't even complete. I even had notes that said, hey, this project's only like 50% complete. There's bugs, it doesn't work, it's going to error if you try to run it. But here's like an example of my code in this system. Why in the world would I ever put incomplete projects on my resume? I could have just spent a week, maybe 2 weeks, and I could have finished all of the projects that were on my resume. It would have looked so much stronger. And if I had just spent a day, one single day learning Git, I could have learned everything I need to know about Git, and I could have uploaded them to Git instead of using Dropbox and saved myself all of the embarrassment, because I guarantee you, when these technical people looked at my resume and they saw Dropbox links and no actual, web page that they could look at, they were probably like, what does this kid think that he's applying here? He's using Dropbox instead of real version control. He doesn't have a demo for us to look at. The code isn't even complete. The projects have errors. Like, this is the worst resume possible. Luckily, it didn't actually end up costing me a job. I was able to land a job with that terrible resume, but that just goes to show, if you take the time and put the effort into your resume, you can get even better jobs and give yourself even better opportunities. Because there's people like me out there that have Dropbox links in their resume that you can already look better than just by having, proper version control and using the proper technologies and languages and features that real web developers are using. Also, something else that was really embarrassing was I forgot to even make the links for the Dropbox publicly available. So as soon as people tried to download the code, they couldn't, and they had to email me and be like, hey, I don't have access to this. Can you give me access? So I had to give them access. It was a nightmare. But the one thing that interested me was a lot of the companies I interviewed with, they were actually impressed with the projects I had done, even though they were partially incomplete, and even though they were uploaded on Dropbox, they actually liked the code and they saw the code and they thought it was good for the people that actually looked at it. So if you have impressive projects, Even if they're not, perfect or amazing, just having those good projects on your resume is really going to make you stand out. And like I said, I didn't do this at all right. Honestly, the only reason I think I ended up getting a job with this resume is because I took all the skills that I learned from all the failures in my first interview with the Rakes program, and I decided I was going to learn from those and improve on them. And I came into all the interviews I had with extreme confidence. I came in super prepared. I never made any of the mistakes I made in the previous interview. And because of that, my interview was so strong that they were able to overlook, the terrible Dropbox links on my resume and incomplete code. And they saw, okay, this guy came in and he crushed his interview. He knows what he's talking about. We want to hire him. Another thing that really helped is I was able to go to a career fair to talk to a lot of these companies. And that's something that a lot of self-taught developers don't have access to, which is why I created my own program called careerfair.dev. It's going to be linked down in the description. It's where I run virtual career fairs with real companies, real applicants, where you can sign up completely for free to be able to enroll in the next career fair and start talking to companies face to face, which allows you to skip a lot of the headache of automated resume reviews and so on. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend you check it out down in the description below. And I really hope that you're able to learn something from this video. And at the very least, you're able to at least laugh at me because of all the mistakes that I made. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know. I have tons of other mistakes I've made as a developer I'd love to share with you. And with that said, thank you very much for watching and have a good day.